Because, I think there's a tremendous connection between creativity and spirituality. And there's so much intelligence out there, and in the spiritual realms, you can say infinite and divine intelligence. And so, for a human and an ego and an intellect to be able to be creative, for me, if I'm looking, within the self right here, I'm calling upon my experiences and my memories and history and fears and desires and inputs and context. And from all of that, I can create. But if I open to this field that Dr. Larry is referring to, and I get into resonance with what's out there, I can tap into intelligence that exists beyond my physical self. And then I have access to inspiration, and I there's that experience of that, and I'm sure we've all had that when you go, it's like when you get the breath knocked into you, where it's like, oh, and you all of a sudden it's like these brilliant ideas, and it feels like a download or like a hit of something. Sure, it could maybe be coming from my singular self, but some of the most incredible innovations and ideas and problem solving abilities comes from tapping in and accessing information beyond ourselves. But that can only happen if you align with this idea that we are bigger than ourselves here. And there is a field that we're all connected to. And we're all one, but we're all ourselves. And so to tap into that creativity, you kind of have to decide that this is this might be possible and this might be real.
Hello, and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. I'm your co-host, Andy McDowell, founder and owner of Generate Your Value, providing self-leadership, leadership, and business coaching services for corporate executives and business owners.
And I'm Zach Levy, your other co-host. I run a nationwide financial service business with my wife, Megan.
Together, Zach and I have the intention to bring you tips, concepts, ideas, suggestions, stories, and analogies from A to Z, which will help you to grow your personal brand and leadership skills in such a way that joy, happiness, and success, as you define it for yourself, are achieved.
We hope to use our gifts, talents, and experiences in business and leadership to generate value in your life. And with that being said, let's move to our topic for today.
Hello and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. I'm your host today, Andy McDowell, and I can't thank you for tuning into this special episode that I've put together. I had a dream and a goal for this particular season to put some panel discussions together on particular topics. And earlier this season, I had a great conversation with Greg Zlevor of Westwood International about spirituality in business, and you guys liked it so much. I got such tremendous feedback from it that I decided to put together to check that goal box of mine for the podcast, to put a panel of experts together to talk about this notion of spirituality in business and answer questions like what is it and why would this be so popular today, and how does it show up in business that you would recognize it and kind of point your finger at it if you saw it from that perspective. So in the interest of time and wanting to get as much of this conversation in as we can while I have these five wonderful people, I'm going to do a short introduction with them, let you hear their voice. For those that are on audio, you can put a name to a voice because we're going to have six voices in this conversation, and then see where this goes. I think it's going to be a great time. I love these people. I know by the end of this episode, you're going to love these people as well. And uh, if it truly does what we collectively six hope it does, hopefully this will facilitate even more conversations out there in the business world about the dynamic that spirituality can bring to business. So without further ado, let me do some introductions. I'm going to first start with Dr. Larry Farwell. Comes to us from Seattle, Washington. He's the research guy, if you will, on the panel. He's done a lot of work and has a great book out that helps us to understand the connectivity between brain, mind, body, and spirit. So, Dr. Larry, welcome to the panel.
Great to be here, Andy.
Next is Reina Bach. Full disclosure, Reina Bach holds a little piece of my heart because she was my executive coach at Boeing. Comes to us from Denver, Colorado, the land of the Rockies. And she's an executive coach, obviously, since I just stated that. So, Reina, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Andy. So great to be here with you and these amazing humans.
Next around the table is Aileda Lindal. Comes to us from the great city of Charleston, South Carolina. Another executive coach out there in the ranks that works with a lot of corporate executives. So, Aileda, thanks for coming to the panel.
Thanks for having me.
So we went East Coast, then we're going full West Coast. Amy Wong comes to us from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay. Another executive coach, sort of followed me in the engineering, technical math route when it came to college education and so forth, but does a lot of work with technical companies out there in the San Francisco area. So, Amy, welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Andy. Stoked
Yeah.
to be here.
And last but not least, the guy that started this whole thing. I mean, we saved the best for last, so to speak, right? Greg Zlevor. I encourage you to go back, listen to his episode earlier this season. Comes to us from the great state of Vermont, although he's not there at the moment, so don't go looking for him there. Founder and president of Westwood International Consulting, executive coaching, those type things. So, Greg, thanks for that ripple effect that we're kind of riding the wave in with this discussion, right?
My pleasure. Great to be a good ripple.
So I think we got a ripple effect for Greg and I's discussion because I think there's a lot of concern out there about what technology, the direction that technology is moving, and that all these ones and zeros and bits and bytes are starting to be able to do tasks that over the last 50 years human beings have done. And it kind of begs the question that if we're going to keep growing, society keep growing, GDP and other things that helps to put food on the table and roofs over people's heads, and we're taking away task-oriented jobs with more and more technology as we go down the road, how is it that we're going to sustain this kind of economy for human beings? And I sort of just kind of want to, I mean, that's my take on it. I just want to kind of throw that out as a context for our conversation. But I think we need to start with a question or to get y'all's opinion on what do you feel like is the definition of spirituality and how does it differ from religion? Because I don't think we're here around the table to talk about religion. We're here to talk about spirituality. So I'd love to get some of y'all's flavors, opinions, thoughts on what the definition of spirituality is to kind of set the table for our conversation. So who wants to chime in?
All right, I'll chime in.
Okay, Dr. Leary.
Being a scientist, I do research in neuroscience, also in quantum physics. I'd like to take a little bit of a scientific approach to that question, which I think would be complementary to what some other people here have to say. And if you'll bear with me for just a minute, I want to geek out on the physical structure of the universe and the role of human beings in it. And this will all become relevant in a minute. In front of me, I have a table here. I can knock on it. It looks solid and brown to me. But if you look more scientifically, it's not solid at all. You look closer, it's mostly empty space with molecules moving around very quickly. You look within those, you see atoms. You look within those, you see quarks. You see elementary particles, protons, neutrons, electrons. You look within those, you see quarks. You go down to the string theory level, and you simply see vibrating strings. So this, what looks to me like a solid table is a pattern of vibrations. Now, what is, and again, this can become relevant in a minute. What is vibrating? Einstein coined the term unified field to describe that field of infinite potential that vibrates into the particle wave phenomena that make up the physical universe. So, and the essential constituent of the physical universe is the same as our own essential constituent. The ultimate reality of the physical universe is the same as the ultimate reality within ourselves, the self, the I, our consciousness. All of the great spiritual traditions have said for the last 10,000 years or more that the inner field of pure consciousness is the same as a ground of being from which creation arises, or what we now call the conscious unified field. And we can describe in mathematical terms how the particle wave phenomena that make up the physical creation arise from there. So spirituality, to me, is contact with spirit, contact with that, with ourselves, with our consciousness. And a couple of questions that immediately come up is that real? And is it practical? I think everybody knows that spirituality is really wonderful, but is it real? Is it just some imaginary thing? And also, is it practical in the world of business? Well, the way we create our lives, and again, all the great spiritual and other teachers have said this, it's like we create a resonance. It's like we have a guitar. You pluck a guitar string. It vibrates at a particular resonant frequency. Other instruments in the environment pick up that resonance, and then you have a symphony. That's how we create our lives. You read the latest book that came out last week about how to be successful, or scriptures from 10,000 years ago. They all say the same thing. We create a resonance on the level of our consciousness that moves nature, and we create that in our lives. So that is actually what my dad and he did the physics end, I did the neuroscience end, tested in the scientific laboratory. If we could actually create events in the physical world using consciousness alone. And I won't get into the details of that, but we used alpha particle emission by plutonium, since we understand the probability distribution of that. We found we could create highly improbable events. Now, miracles used to be thought to be impossible events that somehow happened. But in quantum mechanics, anything is possible. So what we showed is that we can literally create miracles, that human beings functioning from the level of consciousness can move nature, move the conscious unified field, and create physical events. That is how we drive our brains, and that's actually how we create our lives. Now, this comes as no surprise to all of you here, because that's what you've been doing. You've been creating miracles in your lives and others. What happened that was new with my dad and I is that we tested that in the scientific laboratory. We actually published it in physics journals. So what is spirituality in business? It's contacting that inner spiritual level of life, the level of consciousness, creating a resonance from that level, and then manifesting that result on our world. So it's not only real, it's not only scientifically proven, it's also the most practical thing we can do. It's not just doing a bunch of stuff, it's having the consciousness to create what we desire in our lives. So that's what spirituality in business is.
And truly living the why of our life out loud.
Yes. The why comes
by being connected to the spirit.
The why comes from the levels of our spirit, from the level of consciousness.
Yeah. All right. Who else? Who else would like to chime in? What are your thoughts on spirituality?
You're muted, Greg.
You're on mute, Greg.
So my mind is much smaller than Dr. Larry, so I put it in kind of simple Wisconsin terms, which is about the extent of my knowledge. But to me, the spirituality is more about living into questions, and questions that move me forward, that have me being more and more directed to something bigger than myself. And if I did understand what Dr. Larry was saying, is that there is a frequency, a resonance, a place, which is more energy than matter, that if I start to live in that spot where I'm serving and connected, I can be more connected, and things can be more connected to me, and we can move something to a better place. And to me, that's spirituality. And I think religion gets so caught up in what people believe and not believe, where spirituality is more about questions, being connected. And to me, that's spirituality.
And would you say, Greg, connected to yourself as well as connected to others when you say connected?
Absolutely. I mean, I was working with actually, Reina and I were working with a group of executives last week. And in part, the more people understand their more awareness than their feelings
Mm-hmm.
and their thoughts, which to me is a way of observing and being engaged in the world, which is different than doing and trying to manipulate or change the world. The more they're in that spot, they tend to be more spiritual because they see more of the connection, they can engage more of what's happening, and they can find ways to serve themselves in the world. And in our process, it was how can we do that as lightly as possible, which then keeps us from creating any damage by trying to do what we want to do or we think is best.
Yeah, there's a couple points there I want to hold on to in my head for later questions, but I appreciate you, Greg, for your thoughts. Anybody else?
I'll piggyback on what Greg said. Is that when I think of spirituality, there's a unification, because from that perspective, to tag on to what Dr. Larry said, is there's that connection, the oneness, right? And we tap into that. And I think practicing spirituality in the workplace, not religion, right? Because religion can separate us,
Mm-hmm.
right? But really going within to connect. And so for me, having that spirituality starts right here. And so it's a choice to allow yourself to, and we say give ourselves permission, but really it's coming home to ourselves, and settling in and being mindful, setting the intention for that connection, right? And also paying attention. And so it's in, for me, it's in the mindfulness and how we show up for ourselves, how in our thoughts and our behaviors, and how we show up with and for other people as well. So there's a practice of spirituality, and it doesn't take work. It just takes attention, and and we can still do everything we have to do in this realm, right, to make things happen, or so we think. But it's the permission and attention, so to connect with self.
And I'd love to piggyback
Sure.
off
Go
that if
ahead,
that's
Amy.
okay, Raina. And and that was so beautifully said. And I think a huge part of spirituality is having this mindset of trust, that there's something, that there's more going on than what we can measure with our five senses. And so everything that has been said here, it's bringing this idea that there is something going on and I can trust that. And there's just so much peace, and there's so you could say faith, but not in that religious based sense. And so that's when I think about the difference between spirituality and business or not. If we just do business for business sake, we're just dealing with the data and we're working with what is. But when we've got spirituality in business, there's this overlay of trust that it's working out, and there's things that are happening, and we have agency, and we're connected, and energy is really important, resonance is really important. And that to me is a big differentiator.
So, Alita, I'm not going to leave you out. Everybody else has chimed in. Do you want
I want it, yeah.
to put your
All the
voice to
people
this?
said, okay, I agree with all that. I agree with all that. And I will add and say, for me, spirituality is the conscious awareness, like we've talked about before. Got the thumbs up. Hey. And that conscious awareness for me is open heart energy. When we're talking about energy, it's open heart energy, working in unison with logical mind. And those two cohesively coming into play. It's oftentimes, I will say, represented in many different ways. Many different terms are used for it. We've heard self-awareness. We hear conscious awareness. We hear enlightenment. We hear from an athlete's point of view, in the zone. Many different ways to reference it, but we're all talking about the same thing.
So, the beginning of our episode, I kind of threw out my thoughts and ideas as to not only why we're doing this panel discussion, but why this panel discussion is timely in the discussion. I kind of like to hear some thoughts from a couple of you on why do you think this conversation about spirituality is timely? What is it that you're seeing in your discussions with leadership in business or business in general or in your own life or so forth that you think this is a time that we need to start having these conversations on a widespread basis?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. A couple of things for me on that. In dealing with the corporate world, and I spend a lot of my time, helping design and run leadership programs for corporations. It struck me this past week that there are several leaders who are asking, what's the ROI for, and they're not even using the word spirituality. It's more of helping people develop, helping people be more connected, having more of a cause, right? Which are all elements of spirituality. And they're asking, what's the ROI on that? What's the return on investment of bringing that in? And to me, they're about 15 to 20 years behind because that equation is completely flipped right now. This generation coming in is asking, what's the ROI for me to give my effort to you and giving my effort and energy to you to help you build whatever you're building? And so the challenge from a spirituality, we could call it something else. Caring more, being more concerned, being more connected, seeing the whole, whatever
Being
that
empathetic.
is. Being empathetic, right? All of those play into it. But large companies and corporations and groups and teams, I think, need to be there because they're going to miss a lot of very talented people who will not give their energy, spirit, and time to the outside endeavor unless there's a connection to something bigger and to themselves, and not just for a paycheck, but to their soul. And so I think that's going to be really important from that perspective.
Thanks, Greg. Anybody else?
I think people, in my experience, the people who I work with and their colleagues, they're really searching for deeper meaning, and it really does tag on to what Greg was just saying. Is they have reached a certain level of success in their careers, whether they have their own business or they're working on their senior level in corporate and or even federal government, and they're saying, "Wow, is this it?" Right? So I went for all the accolades. I got check, check, check. I got the job. I got the big, multiple houses and all the accoutrements of success. But there's something hollow inside, and it's not filling it's not touching their spirit, their soul. And so there are more questions, more conversations for people to go deeper. Generally, in my experience, it's more in those one-on-one conversations where people may not feel quite safe yet to talk about spirituality or deeper meaning and purpose and connection, right? This oneness that we all are starting to really, really feel now. So I think there's an ask being made of people in organizations, is my experience.
Yeah. So do you think leaders who are asking themselves of that, do they have any kind of sense that, well, if I'm asking that about myself, what about the people that work for me? Am I kind of standing alone here as the leader feeling that way, or maybe scratching their head going, well, maybe everybody else feels that way too?
I think it depends on where the particular leader is at. If he or she is new to this, like a new revelation, maybe not asking it. So first looking at self within. And so if they're a little further down that path of questioning and getting some answers, they are starting to look around. That's my experience. And just start wondering on what is this? What's really happening? So.
Yeah, it's a craving for meaning, right? It's a craving for meaning beyond the material stuff that we've all kind of been conditioned to go and chase and follow and achieve. And then when you get to that point, yeah, I've had enough. I can't fill that hole. And that's why I wrote my book, Living on Purpose, to solve it. It's exactly this challenge. Everyone hits this point where, well, what's it all for? What's it all for? And I think at this point in time, there's so much division in the world. There is so much separation and isolation, and everyone feels this deep, deep sense of longing for purpose and for meaning. And so that's where this topic of spirituality really comes in, because it's all about connection to a bigger purpose, to ourselves, to humanity, and really answering that question, why am I doing what I'm doing, and being so in love with the answer.
Yeah, and then you just hit on what I was just going to add, Amy, is that, in my coaching, I try to really profess to people that if you want true engagement with your team, you've got to answer the question why in everything that you do. We're rolling out a new strategy. Okay, why? Or we're changing direction in our sales technique. Okay, why? That, and it's one of my favorite words in the English language because of that, but it's the seeking new meaning. You're kind of going after that why. People are really wanting to know the why. Why am I here? Why does this business exist? Why is it that it's this group of people that are working together? And if you can, as a leader, start answering that question, you're going to get the connectivity and the meaning and the mission and the purpose that you're truly looking for.
Yeah, and I think, if just picking up on that piece, why, Andy, when everyone's looking for the material and we chase the money in the material, question would be why? I think in part because people are looking for security. Okay, so what is it about security? And what can spirituality teach us about security that's different and beyond the material? And to begin to follow that path and to overcome, not to overcome the ego, but to understand that the amygdala, the thalamus, those emotional parts of the brain are there to try to keep us safe, that they push us to look for threats, mostly on the surface level, and that when we overcome those threats, and if we think getting material or money is a way to overcome that, and then all of a sudden we do, if we're fortunate enough to get to that point, and we realize, like Amy and others have said, oh, wait, that's not it yet. That there's a whole nother space. And I was reflecting on, I had this moment, when I say moment, it's probably like 15 to 22 seconds in a silent retreat, where all of a sudden I saw something that was vast and open, that was safe, and that I didn't have any hand in creating. I didn't have any hand in perpetuating, and I almost didn't even have any hand on getting there. Like the whole thing just felt like a gift. Like, oh, this has existed before me, it will exist after me, and yet I'm a part of it. And I think that experience of awareness, that little moment that happened for me, is in part what I think a lot of us continue to search for. Like, how can I live from a place of comfort and security and be connected to all and serve all?
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, what Greg,
and I can chime.
Go ahead, Lita. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Farwell.
What Greg described, I think, is the fundamental human experience of who we are, and we are deep within that unlimited, unbounded consciousness that's beyond time and space. And actually, when I got started in all of this stuff was I was 13 years old. I had a near-death experience. I was drowning, and I experienced myself as this unbounded, infinite being. And I realized, oh, okay, this is what my life is about. That's the point at which I became a seeker, to find out how to get there and how to bring that into the scientific realm. Also, with respect to the whole, the self, the I, the subject, the consciousness, our experience of life being more timely, and spirituality being more timely. 400 years ago, we started an industrial revolution where a lot of the physical things that got done can now be done by machines. Now we're entering an AI revolution where a lot of the mental things that can be done, the intellectual things, can be done by machines. But what machines don't have is they don't have the consciousness. They don't have a soul. They don't have judgment. They don't have the experience of what life feels like. And more and more and more, that's the unique talent that humans bring to any situation, including the business. The inner vision, the experience we can create for ourselves and others. Everything else we can offload to unfeeling machinery. So I think it's very timely now that, I mean, certainly being a scientist, I like the intellect, I like intellectual stuff, but the intellect shouts, the emotions scream, and the intuition whispers. And the way we really get to know life, get to know ourselves, get to know other people, is on that quiet whisper level of intuition. And that's really the unique highest skills that human beings bring and that we can elicit in each other.
And Andy, this begs a question for me, if you don't mind me asking a question of the
Not at
group.
all.
All right. So, Dr. Lair, I think you're absolutely onto something there, and that's right. And here's one of my fears, and I'm curious to see if any of you see if this fear that I extrapolate has any legs to it. With AI gives us the ability to think less because we can plug questions, challenges, issues into AI. It can give us an answer. I see the brain as being wired to help us avoid pain, energy, threats. If AI can help us think less and have less pain, and we take that bait and we run with it as far as we can, what are we going to miss from a spiritual perspective when I see that a lot of our spirituality requires some kind of struggle or challenge or pain? And that's a fear I have. Like, what are we going to become as a society if we lean on AI for the wrong things or too much?
Well, I think I have a somewhat different perspective on what AI does with respect to offloading tasks. And that is, it offloads a lot of the intellectual tasks, but it doesn't offload at all the spiritual quest. In fact, it gives us more time. I mean, we have more time now that we don't have to be out plowing the fields, but with more of the intellectual work being taken over by AI, it gives us more time and more space and more potential awareness to devote to who we are, to go within, to develop that spiritual sense that you described in the experience you described, and that really everybody here has been talking about. That's what we're really here on earth for, and that's what we're really in business for. So it could be an opportunity rather than a trap if we treat it that way, if we take advantage of it to take the awareness within to pursue higher levels of consciousness. I'd be really interested with other people.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question is, what do y'all feel like is the connection between spirituality and creativity? You know, if we talk about Dr. Larry creating this kind of white space for us to really be human much more, instead of just kind of mind intellectual based, but really be human. What do we see as the connectivity between spirituality and creativity?
Well, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I can.
I'm jumping in right
And
now.
there's like, woo, that's a fun question. Raina, did you want to take it?
Oh no, go right ahead because I'm
Okay.
sure we all have
Yeah.
things to
Yeah.
bring. So
I love this question.
yeah.
Because, I think there's a tremendous connection between creativity and spirituality. And there's so much intelligence out there, and in the spiritual realms, you can say infinite and divine intelligence. And so, for a human and an ego and an intellect to be able to be creative, for me, if I'm looking within the self right here, I'm calling upon my experiences and my memories and history and fears and desires and inputs and context. And from all of that, I can create. But if I open to this field that Dr. Larry is referring to, and I get into resonance with what's out there, I can tap into intelligence that exists beyond my physical self, and then I have access to inspiration. And inspiration, and I there's that experience of that, and I'm sure we've all had that when you go, it's like when you get the breath knocked into you, where it's like, oh, and you all of a sudden it's like these brilliant ideas, and it feels like a download or like a hit of something. Sure, it could maybe be coming from my singular self, but some of the most incredible innovations and ideas and problem solving abilities comes from tapping in and accessing information beyond ourselves. But that can only happen if you align with this idea that we are bigger than ourselves here. And there is a field that we're all connected to. And we're all one, but we're all ourselves. And so to tap into that creativity, you kind of have to decide that this might be possible and this might be real. Yeah.
Absolutely, staying open to that. And I think about that, Amy, and everyone is, if you think about some ideas that you've had in the past and you didn't take action on it, and within a short period of time, I don't know if it's a year or even a couple years, you see your same idea that floated your way that you didn't act on. It's out there. Somebody's doing it. Somebody wrote that book. Somebody did this or that came to you. So for me, that's information, energy that came in through the field, through this one being right here, and just to be able to tap into that. And so I think it's overcoming, and letting go of the control, to think we have to control everything. We're better off if we don't. Yes, we have to manage the day to day. Yes, and Aileda, it's the head and the heart, right? It's that blend of the mind and the heart. But it's allowing that information to come in and acknowledging that it does exist. And so I would challenge anyone listening to this podcast is allow yourself to sit for a few minutes. Quiet your mind, have a pause practice, even 5 minutes without your mind going all over the place. See what comes. Information will come. There may be a solution. A lot of people will get solutions in their dreams to problems they're working on, or they'll get information in the shower when they're not thinking about it. It just comes in. So I would challenge anybody to give that a try.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant when you talk about how do we put ourselves in a place to be inspired versus productive. And it's a completely different space. So thank you for making that distinction.
Well,
I think it's a great one.
The title of my book, with respect to spirituality and creativity, the title of my book is The Science of Creating Miracles, Neuroscience, Quantum Physics, and Living the Life of Your Dreams. And the whole point there, what we researched in the laboratory, is that contact with a conscious unified field, contact with our own being, with our own field of unbounded consciousness that everybody here has talked about. It's such a delight to be in a group where everybody gets that. Contact with that and then expressing that in our lives. That's what creativity is. It's like we pluck a guitar string on the level of our consciousness. It sets up a resonance that other instruments in the environment move in a similar resonance, and then we have a whole symphony. And Amy was talking about this aha experience. Actually, there is the brain. This is one of the things I've studied a lot in neuroscience. When the brain has an aha experience, when you have this aha experience, it opens your brain up for reprogramming. And there's actually a brain response that I discovered and have done a lot of research on called a memory and encoding related multifaceted electroencephalographic response, or MER, murmur. And that murmur is actually, those aha experiences are how the brain learns, how we open up to something greater. So again, we're all talking about the same experience, and it has everything to do with spirituality and everything to do with creativity. And it's so much fun with you folks here. You get life at such a deep level. I love you.
Well, that's why I brought this group together, because I knew that each one of you had those characteristics, right? I mean, that's why I consider you guys to be experts in this area. Let's get to go ahead, Aileda.
Yeah, I just wanted to add quickly and kind of like come full circle on a lot of the things that have been discussed. And one of it is, the I. Greg, you brought that up, right? And how individuals really need to be seen, especially in a corporate and a company culture. And I agree with that completely. They need to be seen, heard, and felt. That's what everybody wants. The one thing about spirituality that I will say I've found in my experience and working with clients throughout the years is that they everybody is afraid of being judged, right? That's the biggest and greatest fear. That is the biggest like doom and gloom that's hanging over. When people are willing to get vulnerable, which they do with people, Amy, that they trust, right? Which you drove home so brilliantly, that opening and that trust is when you hear things, people will come to you and all of a sudden there's a floodgate of stories that they're sharing, right? And this is when the coaching and the consulting projects get really good. And we talked about art, and I will say, like, I went to school for art, but then I grew up in corporate America, right? And excelled and climbed the ladder. And then I became a consultant and have been for 13 years. And the thing about that spectacular, like, just the process that I went through, right? To get to that place, the trust gets established, the people open up. When they do, right? Then you can truly build a team. But the thing about the trust factor is that that's when the stories come where it's like they'll share with you the stuff that they're like, you're never going to believe this, right? And if we all start to share the, oh, whoa, like you will not believe what I just came through, or you will not believe, right? Those things that we all think we wouldn't believe, everybody's had them happen. They're just not talking about it, right? They're just not opening up to it. And the creativity, opening to that brings solutions. Without the creativity, there can be no solutions. The solutions have to happen and they have to come so that we can continue to build, right? And design in a way that's evolutionary. And when we talked about the brain and we talked about the AI and the functions, and Greg, your fear, right, that you talked about with that, I will say that the brain, it's inevitable to me, and Dr. Larry, you can say yes or no on this, but it's inevitable. It's going to change how we function from a brain perspective. I say that because I was on with a person who does development, conscious development for the Marines, right? Did that for several years and had a very specific pattern program. We were talking because I have a conscious leadership training program myself that I have designed. He was saying there's certain maneuvers, patterns, just like when you write, you retain information in your brain. If we're suddenly not doing that, and now we're doing it all via computer, it's inevitable that there's going to be some functions that will change for us moving forward, evolutionary in the future. But I will equate that to like an ADHD diagnosis. And we didn't start having those until we got to a place where we weren't studying via encyclopedias anymore. And we started functioning on computers. Brains started thinking faster. So, I mean, it is what it is. We're coming into a place where evolution is required on the human factor, right? Like we need to ante up now as humans, and we need to take ownership in our operating systems so that we can start to be consciously aware with our creations moving forward.
So I want to sort of come down, coming from the aviation world, from the 100,000 foot level down to about the 50,000 foot level, and get a little more practical with you guys from the standpoint of spirituality. How would somebody recognize spirituality when it was in their midst, in their life or in their business world? We've heard terms like mindfulness and getting quiet, um, stepping away from the computer, stepping away from the book because we're kind of stuck with somewhere, and sort of decompressing and allowing things to flow into us with ideas or notions by stepping away from things. Might be some other examples from a practical perspective to say this is what we mean by spirituality?
Well, a little earlier I said the intellect shouts, the emotions scream, the intuition whispers. And there's not a concrete formula where you can say, okay, spirituality looks like da 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 da. Check these boxes. There are some boxes that match up reasonably well, but the way that we really tune into the spiritual sense of people and situations and organizations is on the intuitive level, on the very, very quiet level. You can have a sense, oh yeah, this person, these people, this path forward, this way of interaction, this really resonates deeply with me. So it does require, as Aileda was saying, and several of us have touched on this, it requires using the brain in a different way. It requires using our awareness in a subtler, more profound way. And that, I think, is where mankind is going. And about the Marines, I saw a billboard. For some years now, I've thought there's really an uprising of consciousness taking place in the world. I saw a billboard the other day. It was a recruiting billboard for the U.S. Marines, and it says, "Battles are won within." And if even the Marines are getting to the inner is the cause of the outer, I think that we're headed in the right direction. And I think the way we sense that direction, and by the way, scientists, you may think scientists use their intellect to figure the world out, but that's actually not the way we work. Even Einstein talked about this. The way you discover how nature works is intuitively sensing into the energetic dynamics of nature on an intuitive level. And then you use the intellect as a tool to explain that. So I think that the way that we know spirituality is, and the way that we resonate with it, and the way that we guide ourselves through the maze of the world with the people and organizations and series of actions is by tuning on the intuitive level and allowing, I think everybody here today has said it, allow the mind to settle to a quieter level and tune into that subtle whisper of intuition.
You know that Dr. Larry, the word, well, the phrase being receptive, right? And so really that's a shift in the being, right? And so we're so used to projecting our energy out onto the world to make things happen, but the whisper of the intuition happens when we allow ourselves to be receptive in the awareness. Yeah.
And I would say even, yes, this is so beautiful. So thank you to you both. And in order to do this really well, I really believe that, one of the first fundamental steps we can take is to come home to ourselves. The relationship we have with ourself determines everything. And so whoever's listening might be thinking, well, how does that have to do with spirituality? But the reality is when you come back home to yourself, and what do I mean by that? It's really truly doing the work to come to know that you are unconditionally whole and complete, that you are worthy, you are deserving, that you are enough. That is the definition of unconditional self-love. When you do that work, and I honestly think that's a lifelong practice. When you do that, then what you see out there changes, because the fundamental lens that you look through changes, right? Because the relationship you have with yourself determines the lens you look through out to the world. And so then when you look out to others, you see them as yourself. That is and there's safety, there's trust, there is connection in that. And through that, we have the ability to sit with ourselves, to trust the intuition that's coming through. Because I find a lot of folks, without that step of really trusting themselves, they'll get intuition, but they don't know to trust it. And so they won't follow the inspiration, or they won't heed the advice of their instincts. And so that inner work, the connection with self, I think is fundamental.
I
I think
agree
just
with that.
one thing on that beautiful. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aileda.
No, you go. I'll follow.
Oh, I was going to say, some people who I work with, they say, "Well, all right, this intuition thing sounds really great, but how do I start connecting with it?" And my answer is start small. Start really small. So if your intuition says you're looking for a parking space, your intuition, something inside you says turn right, try it. And paying attention to those little decisions and little choices, even down to which restaurant to go to, right? And so just practicing building the muscle. We were all born with a muscle of intuition, and it's just giving ourselves permission. So maybe not, I tell my clients, don't start with the big ones, right? You're looking at spending $100 million, where to invest. Well, okay, maybe you don't start with that one right away. Right? Maybe you start with the smaller choices on that you can look for in business, right? So you've got a gut sense about this person would be a great hire. Okay, maybe that person would be. So
Yeah. And then celebrate it. Right. So you have to reinforce that
Mhm.
positive feedback, because when the data comes back that, ooh, there's something here and this, you feel the synchronicity. Oh, you got to celebrate that.
yeah,
And then I kid you not, that's such a
Yes.
powerful way
And,
to strengthen.
and
yes,
especially
Yeah.
when it has
Yeah.
to do with tuning into other people, because we're really good at tuning into other people on the intuitive level.
yeah.
All right,
Yeah. And I would
last question. Oh, go ahead, Alita. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead. I was just gonna say I always love it when people say, "But Alita, I'm a realist," right? Like, but I'm a realist. Like, how can I possibly
Yeah.
do these things? And I'm like, wow, because there's just so much stuff out there that fortifies and right and proves and validates these things now. But more importantly, I tell people, I say, okay, I'm a realist too. So if you think, right, do we really think that when we watch our broadcasting systems and we see all of this doom and gloom, do we not stop for 2 seconds and understand how many superheroes are in the world and running around and saving the world and how many miracles are happening every single day? Just because you're not being shown it doesn't mean that it's not happening in reality. So really get consciously aware and in tune with what is reality. And then that's a game changer.
Well, also, I'm a realist, and I mean, as a scientist, we have to follow the data. We can't just come up with an idea and hope it works. And I have proven this phenomenon we've been talking about in the scientific laboratory. You can access a conscious unified field and create measurable differences. And I'm not going to go into the alpha particle emission by plutonium, but if you can create a shift in that probability distribution, you can create a shift in any probability distribution, and that's the whole universe. And so we're not talking woo-woo here. We're talking about what we've proven in the laboratory, and we've proven the neuroscience behind it as well. And Andy, you had something to ask us.
No, I was just gonna say we'll wrap up the discussion with this question. I think we've pointed out in this discussion that there's an ROI for paying attention to this aspect, from what the younger generations are bringing up to what technology is bringing up, to the connection between spirituality and creativity, and truly being human. There's some element of evolution for us humans, if you will, wrapped up in this. So if a leader, CEO, business owner, or whatever, is listening to this conversation and says, "I want to bring spirituality more into our realm in the business," what might be some practical ideas? Maybe we feed off of Reina's comment about start small. If we're going to start small within the business and build upon it with spirituality in the business to get the ROIs that we've talked around the table with today, what might be some ideas or areas they could focus on to start that effort?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is, and it may not be convenient for everybody, and it may have to happen separately, but getting out and away from your desk and getting out into nature. So if you're having a call with your team and it is virtual, maybe everybody is out on a walk, right? And so kind of just breaking that the momentum or construction of sitting behind your desk to try and problem solve, right? And so that would be one thing that comes to mind, is shift up the environment. If you can do it together, even better.
Anybody else?
Well, another thing with respect to a practical application of spiritual principles is, I mentioned earlier the aha experience, the murmur moments. When something comes along and really gets to you, often what people will do is react. shoot the messenger, punish the messenger, make sure that doesn't happen again, or maybe take it internally. Oh, maybe I'm a really horrible person. However, that neither of those really are a spiritual response, and neither of those are really very useful. When something comes along that triggers you, that gets to you, a more productive thing to do is tune into your inner being, tune into yourself, tune into that level of life where you're 100% safe, 100% valuable, 100% powerful. So it appears to be a threat to my value, safety, or power, but actually, when you look at it, almost always, it's really not. You're not really being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. And then, rather than reacting, take the awareness inward for a moment, take a breath, and tune into that sense of yourself. Amy talked about coming home to herself. All of us have talked about. Tune into what it really feels like to be you, what your inner resonance is like, and how that resonates in that situation. And then from that basis of an inner resonance of harmony, an inner resonance of knowing yourself, of being attuned to yourself, then respond to the situation rather than reacting from a sense of defending your value, safety, and power. Go to that inner field where you're 100% safe, 100% valuable, 100% powerful, and from that platform, take action. And I love doing this with you folks. It's such a joy because we're all getting to the same experience. Life is an experience, and we're all getting the same experience. I just love it.
Yeah.
I love you.
Yeah.
What about the one-on-one time between a supervisor and an employee, um, a, a leader and somebody that's working for the leader?
Yeah.
What about in that dynamic could we, starting small,
Yeah.
do something from a spiritual perspective?
I'll jump in on that. It's another word that feels very real in the realm of spirituality and business is love,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have so many misconceptions of love, but love is really truly the creative force in the universe. And I think what can be really powerful is with our presence is there's so much here, and if you just have an intention to open your heart, and in your moments you open your heart to this person, you open your heart to this moment, you open your heart to the situation, and that's really all the instruction is just open your heart in this moment. I mean, even if you're listening to this, just try that. I'm just going to open my heart to this, and there's a shift that happens, and in that things can be transmitted, and transformation can be facilitated. But that right there is a simple practice. Just open your heart to this person, this moment, this conversation for evolution to happen.
Yeah, I love that so much.
Along those lines, Amy,
We're in sync, Reina. We're in
we're all
sync.
so excited.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I had a client executive who was heading into another meeting, had a contentious relationship with this other person historically. And I said, you know what, let's just give this a try. First off, a few minutes before you go into the meeting, why don't you just start thinking of all the positive qualities of this person? And I said also, if you can do it, and it's not woo woo, give it a try, exude love. And so it changed. She emailed me after the meeting. She said, you're not going to believe this,
Mm-hmm.
how he responded. And so to your point, Amy, yeah.
And I think, Andy,
Yeah.
I'm curious how you're going to wrap this all up, Andy. But you asked a specific question about practically, what does this mean for business? I think there's some very practical things businesses can do in this regard. One, more transparency. If they're more transparent, it creates more trust and sheds more light in the corners that don't get the light. Second, it reduces politics. The more they can reduce politics and the more candid they can be, the more they can be working together in partnership to create what needs to be created. And I think those elements are really important because from a spiritual perspective, one thing I look at in my own life is how am I handling things that are being done to me? How am I handling things that are happening outside of me? And I think my reaction or my response to that is a better indication of how I'm doing spiritually than anything I can create on the inside of me. And if a collective can do that, and if a collective can begin to create relationships, a network, an entity that doesn't collude, they can be extremely powerful. And yet it's so difficult, and in a lot of ways requires the spirit we've been talking about, though you don't even have to use that word, because it shows up when people start practicing from trust, openness, consistency, transparency, etc.
Agreed. Before we drop off of here, I want to give a little tip, and I will say this is everybody from a technology standpoint can use their own technology. You can look at your own news feeds. Our algorithms are mirrors reflecting back to us. So pay attention. Is the majority of the information that comes through to you negative, or is it positive? If it's negative, my encouragement would be to select one new positive educational piece of information every day. And slowly over time, gradually, you're going to change your own outer look, right? Inner and outer look to the world, because as you choose positive educational things, your news feed will start to bubble more of those up to you. That's how technology works, right? And how it mirrors back. So use it to your advantage to just do one new educational thing a day. And when it comes to businesses and ROI, I will say from my years of experience, if I'm having a conversation with an executive or a CEO of an organization, I will say this to you. When it comes to improved retention due to improved conscious awareness and conscious leaders, when it comes to the ability to come up with creative solutions across all spectrums for your organization, when it comes to improved resilience and your company culture now sticking with you with an extreme loyalty, right, and respect, and when it improves emotional intelligence of how people respond to each other, because now I can step back and I can say, oh, maybe it's that person's own internal perception, right? I don't know what's happening in their world right now. I don't know if they're suffering a divorce. I don't know if they have a loved one in the hospital. I don't know. And we can put compassion forward and we can respond with compassion and love, as you guys have brought to the forefront. But even if you can't muster love, if you can muster compassion, right? Kind of like when the guy steers his car in front of you and you have that fear reaction. Instead of having that, we can just as easily be like, whoa, I hope that they're okay. I'm so glad I'm okay. That's ROI. Like, how do you deny that?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't write Aileda a check uh, in any respect, but I think that, Greg, is the explanation point that I was looking for to wrap this
Beautiful.
up, was to say, with what's going on in the world and so forth, the ROI is starting to become apparent for us, for spirituality to come into business, to bring humanness into the business world, not just the brain and the intellect and fixing problems, but to bring humanness. And so doing so, we're kind of elevating ourselves as humans here on Earth. By doing so, allows us to keep the world going as it is, and allowing food on the table, a roof over our heads, and everything to keep existing. But we're going to have to evolve in the way that we do things to make that happen. And that's truly why I wanted to put this panel together, to have this discussion, to create this ripple effect in the world, to get people to start thinking this way, acting this way, and so forth, in hopes that we as our collective six can contribute to that effort, right? In hopes that other people will hear this and make it a point to start thinking about it and having their own discussions in this, that maybe we can get some momentum.
Andy, thank you.
Around this notion.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Andy.
So I can't thank you enough, panelists, for taking the important resource of your time, energy, your expertise, your thoughts to contribute to this effort. And for you, the listening audience, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your life, that finite resource in your life called time, to have a listen. Now, The question is, though, and I'm going to go back to Dr. Larry on this because he's in the physics world. I said this before in our coordination call, right? This is potential energy. This whole conversation, the creation of this conversation is potential energy, and it doesn't become kinetic until you start sharing it with others. They get to hear it, listen in action, the kinetic energy behind it. And that's the way we get the ripple effect, is by sharing it and getting action behind the potentiality of this conversation and these ideas. So I can encourage you to share it on your social media or where else, so that we can get this ripple effect going. So that being said, this is a special edition of the episode. We are here every Tuesday with another episode with terrific guests like these 5 beautiful people I see on my screen here, to bring their expertise and thoughts, their life story, and how it is they use self-leadership to lead their own lives as well as to lead others in an effort to accomplish goals. So that being said, have a great week, have a great day, and we'll see you next time here on the Generate Your Value podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Generate Your Value podcast. If you find our conversations to be useful in your life, I invite you to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode.
You can find me online at Instagram at _Zach.Levy, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
For information on my coaching services, visit my website at www.generateyourvalue.com. You can also find me and my company on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Simply search for Generate Your Value on those platforms.
Once again, thanks for joining us for today's podcast, and we invite you to generate your value in this world.